There is a place on this planet where the pressure is so extreme that it would crush a human body in less than 1 second. A place where no sunlight has ever reached. A place where the temperature hovers just above freezing. And yet, against every expectation, life thrives. This place is not on another world. It is not hidden behind some impossible barrier of technology. It is right here, on Earth, beneath approximately 11,000 meters of black, silent water. It is called the Mariana Trench, and most of what lies within it remains a complete mystery. Consider this fact carefully. Humans have mapped the surface of Mars with greater accuracy than we have mapped the bottom of our own ocean. We have sent robots to the frozen plains of distant worlds, and yet the deepest gash in our own planet sits largely uncharted, unmeasured, and unexplained. The floor of the Mariana Trench, at its lowest point, descends to a depth of nearly 11,000 meters beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. That is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. If you were to take that mountain, the highest point on the surface of the Earth, and drop it into the Mariana Trench, its summit would still sit more than 2,000 meters below the waves. The ocean would swallow it whole, and no one standing on the surface would ever know it was there. The darkness at that depth is absolute. Not the kind of darkness you experience when you close your eyes. Not the kind of darkness you find in a room with the lights off. This is the kind of darkness that has never been interrupted. There is no memory of light down there, no trace of it, no echo. The water at the bottom of the Mariana Trench has not been touched by a single photon of sunlight in all of recorded history. And in that darkness, something moves, something feeds, something breathes. We have found organisms at the bottom of that trench that should not exist according to the rules of biology as we understand them. Creatures that survive pressures exceeding 1,000 times the standard atmospheric pressure at sea level. Organisms that metabolize chemicals instead of food. Life forms that exist without oxygen, without warmth, without light, and without any clear explanation for how they got there. And yet, for all the missions, for all the technology, for all the billions spent on ocean exploration, fewer humans have visited the bottom of the Mariana Trench than have walked on the surface of the moon. That number is staggeringly small. As of recent counts, the total number of people who have descended to the deepest point of the ocean can be counted on your fingers. Not dozens, not hundreds, a handful. The deepest place on Earth, a feature so immense that it stretches for more than 2,500 kilometers across the floor of the Pacific, has been touched by human eyes only a few times in the entirety of our existence. We know almost nothing about it, and what we do know raises more questions than it answers. Scientists have pulled sediment samples from the floor of the Challenger Deep and found living bacteria thriving in conditions that were once considered categorically lethal. They have recorded sounds in the Mariana Trench that match no known species and no known geological process. They have discovered that the trench is pulling 3 times more water into the Earth's interior than our models predicted, raising fundamental questions about the planet's water cycle at the deepest level. They have found plastic waste, fragments of human garbage, resting on the sediment at a depth of nearly 11,000 meters, proof that our presence has reached farther than our understanding. Every new expedition to the Mariana Trench returns with data that contradicts existing models. Every sample reveals something that the textbooks did not prepare us for. Every image transmitted from the bottom forces a revision of what we thought we knew. And yet, funding for deep ocean exploration remains a fraction of what is spent on space missions. The irony is sharp. We are searching for signs of life on distant moons, while ignoring the life that exists in the deepest places of our own world. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand why the Mariana Trench is not just a deep hole in the ocean floor. You are going to understand why it challenges our models of geology, biology, and chemistry. You are going to learn about the creatures that live in its crushing depths, the expeditions that have risked everything to reach it, and the scientific discoveries that have quietly rewritten our understanding of life on this planet. You are going to hear about sounds recorded in the deep ocean that remain unexplained, about structures found on the seabed that defy easy interpretation, about organisms that appear to operate outside the boundaries of known biology, and you are going to confront a simple, uncomfortable truth. We do not understand our own planet, not even close. Before we get started, if you find these mysteries as fascinating as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. To understand the Mariana Trench, you first have to understand the ocean itself. Not as a body of water, not as a geographic feature, but as a world. A world that is, in many ways, more alien than anything we have discovered beyond the atmosphere of this planet. The ocean covers approximately 71% of the surface of the Earth. That is not a small fraction. That is not a modest share. Nearly 3/4 of the planet you live on is water, and the vast majority of that water has never been explored, never been measured, and never been seen by human eyes. Current scientific estimates suggest that more than 80% of the ocean floor remains unmapped by modern sonar technology. Some researchers place that figure closer to 95%, depending on the resolution of mapping considered acceptable. Either way, the conclusion is the same. We are living on a planet that we barely know. The average depth of the world's oceans is approximately 3,688 meters. That number is difficult to feel. It sounds like a measurement, a statistic, a line in a textbook. But imagine standing at the edge of a cliff and looking straight down for nearly 4 kilometers. Imagine the weight of all that water pressing against the walls. Imagine the silence. The average ocean depth is already far beyond the reach of sunlight, far beyond the range of most submarines, far beyond any environment that a human being can survive in without extraordinary technology. And the Mariana Trench is not average. The Mariana Trench is the exception. It is the deepest wound on the surface of the planet. And its lowest point, a small slot-shaped valley known as the Challenger Deep, lies approximately 10,920 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, nearly 11 kilometers straight down. To put this in perspective, consider a comparison. The cruising altitude of a commercial passenger airplane is typically around 10,000 to 12,000 meters. That means the Challenger Deep is roughly as far below the surface of the ocean as a passenger jet is above the surface of the ground. You could take that entire column of air from the ground to the airplane and press it down into the ocean, and it would barely reach the bottom. But there is a critical difference. Air is thin, water is dense. At sea level, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on every square centimeter of your body is roughly 1 kilogram. We do not feel it because we evolved in it. Our bodies are adapted to that pressure. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the pressure is approximately 1,099 times greater than what you experience standing on the surface of the Earth. That means every square centimeter of your body would be subjected to a force equivalent to roughly 1,099 kilograms. To picture this, imagine stacking 50 large automobiles on top of a single postage stamp. That is the kind of pressure the Mariana Trench exerts on anything that dares to exist at its bottom. No unprotected human body could survive it. No standard submarine could withstand it. No ordinary material could hold its shape under that weight. The science of oceanography divides the ocean into 5 primary zones based on depth, temperature, and the penetration of light. These zones are not arbitrary. They represent fundamentally different environments, each with its own physics, its own chemistry, and its own forms of life. Understanding them is essential to understanding why the Mariana Trench is so extraordinary, and why so much of what we find there defies expectation. The first zone is the epipelagic zone, sometimes called the sunlit zone. It extends from the surface of the ocean to a depth of approximately 200 meters. This is the zone you see when you look at the ocean from shore. This is where sunlight penetrates, where waves break, where the water is warm, blue, and full of life. Almost all of the ocean's photosynthesis occurs in this zone. Phytoplankton, microscopic organisms that produce oxygen and form the base of the marine food chain, live here. Fish, dolphins, whales, sea turtles, jellyfish, and nearly every marine creature that most people can name inhabits this thin layer of water. It is vibrant, it is alive, it is beautiful, and it represents less than 5% of the total volume of the ocean. Everything you have ever seen of the sea, Every photograph, every documentary, every dive, every memory you have of ocean life almost certainly took place in this narrow band of illuminated water. Below it, a different world begins. The second zone is the mesopelagic zone, often called the twilight zone. It extends from 200 meters to approximately 1,000 meters in depth. Here, sunlight fades. At 200 meters, you may still perceive a faint blue glow, the last trace of the sun's energy filtering through the water column. By the time you reach 400 or 500 meters, that glow has vanished entirely. The water turns from blue to deep indigo, and then to black. The temperature drops, the pressure builds, and life begins to change. In the twilight zone, creatures have evolved extraordinary adaptations to survive in an environment of near-total darkness. Bioluminescence, the ability to produce light through chemical reactions within the body, becomes common. Fish with enormous eyes patrol the shadows. Organisms develop transparent bodies to avoid casting silhouettes against the faint light above. The twilight zone is home to the largest daily migration on Earth, a phenomenon known as the diel vertical migration. Every evening, billions of organisms rise from the twilight zone to the surface to feed under the cover of darkness. Every morning, they descend back down, retreating from the sunlight into the safety of the deep. This migration involves a greater total mass of living creatures than any other movement on the planet, and it happens every single day, largely invisible to the world above. Below the twilight zone lies the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone. It stretches from 1,000 meters to approximately 4,000 meters in depth. Here, there is no light at all, none. The darkness is absolute and permanent. The temperature hovers around 4 degrees Celsius, sometimes colder. The pressure has now exceeded 100 times the surface atmosphere. Life in the midnight zone is sparse but strange. Giant squid inhabit these waters. Deep-sea anglerfish, with their bioluminescent lures dangling from their foreheads, hunt in perfect blackness. The creatures here have adapted to an existence without light, without warmth, and with limited food. Much of what they consume falls from above, a slow, endless rain of organic debris known as marine snow. Dead plankton, fecal pellets, fragments of dead organisms drifting down through kilometers of dark water. This is the food supply for an entire ecosystem. A gentle, ceaseless shower of decay that takes days or even weeks to reach the bottom. Life at these depths is patient, it waits, it endures, and it has done so for longer than we can measure. The fourth zone is the abyssopelagic zone, the abyssal zone. It extends from 4,000 meters to approximately 6,000 meters in depth. The word abyss comes from a Greek term meaning bottomless. It was named by early scholars who believed that the ocean simply had no floor, that it descended forever into an infinite void. They were wrong about the floor, but they were right about the feeling. The abyssal zone is a place of crushing stillness. The pressure here exceeds 400 times the surface atmosphere. The water temperature remains just above freezing. The currents are slow and sluggish. The terrain is flat, covered in fine sediment that has accumulated over unimaginable spans of time. This sediment, in some places, is hundreds of meters thick. It is composed of the remains of organisms that died near the surface and slowly settled to the bottom. Each layer tells a story. Each grain is a piece of a life that once existed in the sunlit waters above. The abyssal plain is the largest habitat on Earth by area. It covers more than half of the entire planet's surface. And it is, by almost any measure, the least explored and least understood environment on Earth. And then there is the Hadal zone, the deepest of all, named after Hades, the Greek underworld. The Hadal zone begins at 6,000 meters and extends down to the very bottom of the ocean, wherever that bottom may be. In the Mariana Trench, it reaches nearly 11,000 meters. The Hadal zone does not cover large areas of the ocean floor. It exists only in ocean trenches, those long, narrow gashes in the Earth's crust where tectonic plates converge and one slides beneath the other in a process known as subduction. There are roughly 33 major Hadal trenches scattered around the Pacific Rim and other tectonic boundaries. Together, they represent less than 1% of the total ocean floor by area, and yet they are among the most significant geological features on the planet. They are the deepest points, the highest pressure environments, the most extreme conditions that exist on the surface of this world, and they are, in many ways, the least visited places on Earth. To understand the significance of the Hadal zone, Consider the journey of light. When sunlight strikes the surface of the ocean, it begins to fade almost immediately. The red wavelengths are absorbed within the first 10 meters. Orange disappears by about 40 meters. Yellow by around 75 meters. Green persists a little longer, reaching perhaps 100 meters in clear water. Blue light penetrates the deepest, sometimes reaching 200 meters before it, too, is absorbed. Beyond that depth, there is nothing. The ocean below 200 meters receives no useful sunlight. None. A photon of light, traveling from the sun, crosses roughly 150 million kilometers of space in about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. It survives the journey through the vacuum of space, through the atmosphere of the Earth, through the cloud layer and the surface of the ocean. And then, within the first 200 meters of water, it is absorbed. Gone, consumed by the medium it entered. Below that point, the ocean exists in permanent night, and the Hadal zone, beginning at 6,000 meters, is more than 30 times deeper than the point where the last trace of sunlight disappears. 30 times deeper than total darkness. The depth of the Hadal zone is not just impressive, it is conceptually overwhelming. Consider another comparison. The wreck of the Titanic lies at a depth of approximately 3,800 meters in the North Atlantic Ocean. That depth is considered extreme. It took decades after the sinking for technology to advance, to the point where the wreck could be located and explored. When Robert Ballard and his team finally found the Titanic in 1985, it was hailed as one of the great achievements of ocean exploration. And the Titanic lies at a depth that is only about 1/3 of the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. If the ocean were a vertical skyscraper, the Titanic would be on the 35th floor. The bottom of the Mariana Trench would be in the basement. The distance between the two is staggering. And yet, the challenges multiply exponentially with depth. The pressure increases linearly, but the engineering difficulties, the biological unknowns, and the logistical challenges of operating in those conditions grow far faster. Every additional kilometer of depth demands entirely new approaches to materials science, communication, power, and life support. There is also the question of temperature. In the epipelagic zone, where sunlight warms the water, temperatures can range from roughly 25 degrees Celsius in tropical regions to near freezing in polar waters. But below the thermocline, a boundary layer where temperature drops rapidly with depth, the ocean becomes uniformly cold. By the time you reach the abyssal zone, the temperature has fallen to between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, temperatures hover around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, barely above the freezing point of fresh water. The seawater at those depths does not freeze, partly because of its salinity and partly because of the immense pressure which lowers the freezing point. But it is cold, profoundly, enduringly cold. The organisms that live at these temperatures have metabolisms that operate at a fraction of the speed of surface-dwelling creatures. Their enzymes function slowly. Their growth rates are measured in years rather than months. Their lives unfold on timescales that would be unrecognizable to anything living on the surface. The history of human attempts to explore these depths is a story of ambition, engineering, and extraordinary risk. For most of human history, the deep ocean was simply unknowable. Ancient civilizations understood the surface of the sea. They fished in it, they sailed upon it, they feared its storms and respected its power. But the idea that the ocean had a measurable depth, that it had a floor, that it had features and landscapes and life at its bottom, was not seriously considered until the modern era. One of the earliest systematic attempts to measure the ocean's depth came in the 1870s, during the voyage of HMS Challenger. This British naval vessel was converted into a scientific research ship and sent on a 3.5-year voyage around the world, covering nearly 70,000 nautical miles. The expedition, which began in 1872 and ended in 1876, was one of the most ambitious scientific endeavors of the 19th century. The crew of the Challenger used weighted ropes to measure the depth of the ocean at hundreds of locations. In the western Pacific, near the Mariana Islands, they recorded a depth of approximately 8,184 meters. It was the deepest measurement ever taken at that time. it was a staggering number. It suggested the existence of a world beneath the sea that was far larger and far deeper than anyone had imagined. The point they measured was later named the Challenger Deep in honor of the ship and the crew who first documented it. But their measurement, impressive as it was, would later prove to be short of the true depth. Modern sonar surveys have revealed that the Challenger Deep reaches approximately 10,920 meters, and possibly deeper in certain narrow features. The Challenger expedition could not have known this. They were limited by the technology of their time. But they opened a door that has never been closed. The development of sonar technology in the 20th century transformed our understanding of the ocean floor. During and after the Second World War, naval forces invested heavily in acoustic sensing technology to detect submarines. This technology, originally designed for military purposes, proved invaluable for scientific exploration. By sending pulses of sound into the water and measuring the time it took for the echoes to return, scientists could calculate the depth of the ocean with unprecedented accuracy. In the 1950s and 60s, sonar surveys revealed that the ocean floor was not the flat, featureless plain that many had imagined. It was a landscape of mountains, valleys, ridges, and trenches. Massive underwater mountain ranges, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, stretched for thousands of kilometers. Deep trenches carved into the seabed with geometries that echoed the movement of tectonic plates. The picture that emerged was of a dynamic, geologically active world hidden beneath the surface of the sea. And at the heart of this picture, at the deepest point, sat the Mariana Trench. The contribution of Marie Tharp to this understanding cannot be overlooked. In the 1950s, Tharp, an American geologist and cartographer, began painstakingly plotting ocean depth measurements collected by research ships onto large maps. Working alongside Bruce Heason at the Lamont Geological Observatory, Tharp compiled thousands of soundings into the first comprehensive physiographic maps of the ocean floor. Her work revealed the existence of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge's Central Rift Valley, a feature that provided powerful evidence for the theory of plate tectonics. Tharp's maps showed the world what the ocean floor actually looked like, not as a featureless basin, but as a terrain of ridges, fractures, and abyssal plains as complex as any continental landscape. Her contributions were initially met with skepticism, in part because she was a woman working in a field dominated by men in that era. But the data was unambiguous. The ocean floor had topography, it had structure, it had a story written in rock and sediment, and that story was far more dramatic and far more dynamic than anyone had anticipated. One of the most striking features revealed by sonar mapping is the sheer number of seamounts, underwater mountains, that rise from the ocean floor without reaching the surface. Current estimates suggest that there are more than 100,000 seamounts on the ocean floor, of which only a small fraction have been studied. Many of these seamounts rise thousands of meters above the surrounding abyssal plain, creating isolated ecosystems that function like underwater islands. The organisms that colonize seamounts are often found nowhere else, adapted to the specific currents, temperatures, and chemistries of their particular mountain. Seamounts concentrate nutrients, attract predators, and serve as waypoints for migrating species. They are biodiversity hotspots in the middle of the abyssal desert, and the vast majority of them have never been surveyed. Their biology is unknown. Their geology is unmapped. Their ecological significance is largely a matter of speculation. More than 100,000 underwater mountains, and we have looked at only a handful. The Mariana Trench itself is a crescent-shaped scar in the floor of the western Pacific Ocean. It stretches for approximately 2,550 kilometers, running roughly parallel to the Mariana Islands, a chain of volcanic islands that form an arc above the trench. The trench is relatively narrow compared to its length, averaging only about 69 kilometers in width. Its formation is the result of tectonic subduction, a process in which the Pacific Plate, one of the Earth's largest tectonic plates, is forced beneath the smaller Mariana Plate. As the Pacific Plate descends into the Earth's mantle, it creates a deep depression in the ocean floor. The angle of descent, the speed of subduction, and the composition of the rock all contribute to the extraordinary depth of the trench. The Mariana Trench is not the longest ocean trench, The Peru-Chile Trench, for example, stretches for more than 5,900 kilometers along the western coast of South America. But the Mariana Trench is the deepest, and it is the deepest by a significant margin. The deepest known point in the Mariana Trench, and therefore the deepest known point on the surface of the Earth, is the Challenger Deep. It is located at the southern end of the trench, approximately 340 kilometers southwest of the island of Guam. Multiple sonar surveys have measured its depth at different values, depending on the technology used and the specific point measured. The most widely cited figure is 10,920 meters, though some measurements have recorded depths exceeding 10,990 meters. The precise depth remains a matter of ongoing measurement and refinement, but the difference of a few dozen meters is, in some ways, beside the point. The Challenger Deep is deep enough to swallow entire mountain ranges, deep enough to create conditions that exist nowhere else on the surface of the Earth, deep enough to test the limits of every technology we have designed to explore it. And here is where the scale becomes personal. If you were somehow transported to the bottom of the Challenger Deep without any protective equipment, you would not drown. Drowning takes time. The pressure at that depth would kill you almost instantly. Every air-filled cavity in your body, your lungs, your sinuses, your middle ear, would be compressed beyond the point of structural failure. Your chest would collapse. Your organs would be crushed. The event would be so fast that your nervous system would not have time to register pain. You would simply cease to exist as a functioning biological organism. This is not speculation. This is physics. This is the reality of what 11 kilometers of water pressure does to an unprotected body. But what makes this truly unsettling is not the pressure. It is not the darkness. It is not the cold. What makes the Mariana Trench unsettling is the fact that despite all of these hostile conditions, life exists there, not just exists, thrives. Scientists have found living organisms at the very bottom of the Challenger Deep, single-celled organisms called foraminifera, shrimp-like amphipods, strange, gelatinous creatures that pulse through the darkness. These organisms live and reproduce under pressures that would destroy any human-made structure not specifically engineered to withstand them. They feed on chemicals, on sediment, on the remains of dead organisms that rain down from the world above. They have adapted to an environment so extreme that it challenges our fundamental understanding of what life requires to exist. The question is not just what lives down there. The question is how. How does biology function under those conditions? How do proteins fold correctly at those pressures? How do cell membranes maintain their integrity? How do metabolic processes continue when every physical parameter, temperature, pressure, chemistry, is pushed to the extreme? These are not trivial questions. They sit at the intersection of biology, chemistry, physics, and geology. And the answers, so far, have only raised more questions. But what scientists discovered next was worse than anyone expected. On January the 23rd, 1960, two men sealed themselves inside a small steel sphere attached to the underside of a vessel called the Trieste. Their names were Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh. Piccard was a Swiss oceanographer and engineer, the son of Auguste Piccard, a famous physicist and inventor who had pioneered high-altitude balloon flights decades earlier. Walsh was a lieutenant in the United States Navy. Together, they were about to attempt something that had never been done before. They were going to descend to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. The Trieste was a bathyscaphe, a type of deep-diving vessel designed for extreme depths. It was not a submarine in the conventional sense. It did not move horizontally through the water with any meaningful speed or agility. It was essentially a heavy steel sphere, barely large enough to hold two men in a crouched position, suspended beneath a large float filled with gasoline. The gasoline, being lighter than water, provided buoyancy. Iron pellets, held in place by electromagnets, served as ballast. To descend, the crew would slowly release gasoline and allow the weight of the iron to pull the vessel down. To ascend, they would release the iron pellets, and the remaining gasoline would lift them back to the surface. The design was simple. The engineering was extraordinary. The descent took approximately 4 hours and 47 minutes. As the Trieste sank deeper and deeper, the pressure mounted. The steel walls of the observation sphere groaned. the temperature dropped. The water outside the tiny porthole shifted from blue to indigo to black. At around 9,000 meters, Pickard and Walsh heard a loud cracking sound. It was sharp. It was sudden. It echoed through the tiny cabin. They later discovered that the crack came from the outer plexiglass window pane. It had developed a fracture under the enormous pressure. For a moment, the two men considered aborting the dive. They were deeper than any human had ever been. They were inside a pressurized sphere surrounded by water that would kill them in an instant if the hull failed. The fracture could have been the beginning of a catastrophic implosion, but they decided to continue. At 1100 hours, local time, on that January morning, the Trieste touched the bottom of the Challenger Deep. The depth gauge read approximately 10,916 meters. Pickard and Walsh looked through the porthole and saw, for the first time in human history, the floor of the deepest place on Earth. It was flat, covered in a fine, pale sediment. It looked, Pickard later wrote, like a desert of diatomaceous ooze, and in that sediment something moved. Pickard reported seeing a flatfish, approximately 30 centimeters long, lying on the bottom. The significance of this observation was enormous. If a fish could exist at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, it meant that life had penetrated to the absolute limit of the ocean's depth. It meant that biological organisms had found a way to survive under pressures that would obliterate most engineered structures. It was a discovery that challenged assumptions. However, that observation has been debated ever since. Later scientists questioned whether what Pickard saw was truly a flatfish. The sediment stirred up by the Trieste descent would have clouded the water significantly. The porthole was small. The light from the vessel's external lamps was limited. Some marine biologists have suggested that what Pickard observed may have been a sea cucumber, a holothurian, rather than a true fish. Others have argued that certain species of fish could, in theory, survive at those depths, though none have been confirmed by subsequent expeditions. The debate remains unresolved, but the essential point stands. Life was present at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. Something biological, something alive, was moving in the sediment at a depth of nearly 11 kilometers. After the Trieste's historic dive, something unexpected happened. Nothing. For more than 50 years, no human being returned to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. The Trieste's mission was a triumph of engineering and courage, but it also demonstrated just how difficult and expensive deep ocean exploration truly is. The Cold War redirected funding towards space exploration and nuclear submarines. The scientific community lacked the resources and the political will to mount another crewed expedition to the deepest point in the ocean. For half a century, the Challenger Deep sat untouched by human hands. During that long gap, unmanned probes were sent to the Mariana Trench on occasion. In 1995, the Japanese remotely operated vehicle Kaiko reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep and measured a depth of 10,911 meters. Kaiko collected sediment samples from the bottom and brought them to the surface. Those samples contained living microorganisms, including bacteria and foraminifera. The foraminifera were particularly significant. These are single-celled organisms that build tiny shells, or tests, from minerals in the water around them. The fact that they existed at the bottom of the Challenger Deep meant that biological processes, shell construction, mineral extraction, metabolic activity, were all functioning under pressures that exceeded 1,000 atmospheres. The discovery confirmed what Pickard and Walsh had suggested decades earlier. The bottom of the ocean is not dead. It is alive, and it operates under rules that we are only beginning to understand. Then, in 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron made a solo descent to the bottom of the Challenger Deep in a specially designed submersible called the Deep Sea Challenger. Cameron's dive was the first crewed mission to reach the Challenger Deep since Pickard and Walsh in 1960. The gap between those two dives was 52 years. Let that sink in. In the time between the first and second human visits to the deepest point on Earth, humanity had landed on the Moon 6 times, launched hundreds of satellites, built an international space station, and sent probes to the outer edges of the solar system. But only one additional person had travelled to the deepest point on our own planet. Cameron spent approximately 3 hours at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. He collected samples. He filmed the environment with high-definition cameras. He observed the sediment, the water, the darkness. And he reported something that surprised many observers. He described the bottom of the Challenger Deep as desolate. He said it felt like another planet. Not lifeless, exactly, but profoundly alien. The scale of the emptiness was difficult to convey. The silence was total. The darkness was so complete that without the submersible's lights, there would have been no visual information at all, just pressure and blackness and cold, and the faint awareness of being at the lowest point on the surface of the Earth. The deep-sea Challenger itself was a marvel of engineering, a vertical torpedo-shaped vessel designed from scratch to withstand the pressure of the Challenger Deep. It was built with a syntactic foam hull, a material composed of millions of tiny hollow glass spheres suspended in a resin matrix. This foam provided buoyancy while resisting the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. The pilot sphere, the tiny capsule in which Cameron sat during his descent, was forged from a special steel alloy and had an internal diameter of just 1.1 meters. Cameron could not stand up inside it. He could not stretch his legs. He sat in a fetal position for the entire dive, hunched forward with his knees drawn up, peering through a small viewport at the world outside. The sphere had walls that were more than 6 centimeters thick. At the surface, the sphere was perfectly round. By the time it reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the pressure had compressed it by approximately 2.5 centimeters in diameter. The sphere shrank measurably under the weight of the water. Cameron could feel the change. He could see the viewport shift slightly as the metal walls contracted around him. The samples Cameron collected from the Challenger Deep revealed a microbial world far more active than expected. Researchers who analyzed the sediment found exceptionally high concentrations of microbial life compared to surrounding areas of the ocean floor at shallower depths. The organic matter that settles into the narrow slot of the Challenger Deep becomes concentrated, funneled by the steep walls of the trench into a relatively small area of flat seabed. This creates a surprisingly nutrient-rich environment at the very bottom. The bacteria that live in this sediment break down the organic matter and, in doing so, release nutrients that support additional organisms. The Challenger Deep is not a biological desert. It is in some ways a biological oasis, a place where the geometry of the trench itself creates conditions that concentrate life rather than dispersing it. This was not what scientists expected. The prevailing assumption had been that the deeper you go, the less life you find. The Challenger Deep does not follow this rule. Once again, the trench defied expectation, and it gets worse, because the Mariana Trench is not just a geological feature, it is an active zone of subduction, a place where one tectonic plate is being forced beneath another. This process does not happen smoothly. It happens in fits and starts, in sudden, violent releases of energy that produce some of the most powerful earthquakes on the planet. The region around the Mariana Trench is one of the most seismically active areas on Earth. In 2016, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck near the trench, generating shock waves that radiated through the Pacific. The earthquake occurred at a depth of approximately 600 kilometers beneath the surface, deep within the subduction zone itself. Earthquakes of this magnitude, originating from this depth, are rare and poorly understood. The mechanics of how rock can fracture and slip at such extreme depths, where the pressure and temperature should theoretically prevent brittle failure, remain the subject of intense scientific debate. But the earthquakes are only part of the story. The Mariana Trench is also a place where the Earth's crust is being pulled into the mantle, carrying with it enormous quantities of water. This water is not liquid in the traditional sense. It is chemically bound within the crystal structure of minerals in the oceanic crust. As the Pacific Plate descends into the mantle, it carries this bound water with it. Studies published by researchers at Washington University in St. Louis estimated that the Mariana Trench subduction zone transports approximately 3 times more water into the Earth's interior than previous models had predicted. 3 times more. That is not a small correction. That is a fundamental revision of our understanding of the water cycle at its most basic level. It means that far more water is being pulled into the deep earth than we thought. And the question of where all that water goes, whether it is stored in the mantle, released through volcanic activity, or trapped in deep mineral structures, remains largely unanswered. Something is wrong with our assumptions. That is the uncomfortable reality of the Mariana Trench. Every time we look more closely, every time we send a probe or a submersible or a sensor into its depths, we discover that our models are incomplete. The biology does not match our predictions. The geology does not follow our simulations. The chemistry reveals processes that we did not anticipate. The Mariana Trench is not simply deep, it is different. It operates by rules that we have not yet fully identified. Consider, for instance, the sound known as the Western Pacific biotwang. In 2014 and 2015, researchers from Oregon State University deployed passive acoustic monitors in the Mariana Trench as part of an ongoing study of deep ocean sound. These hydrophones, specialized underwater microphones, were placed at depths of approximately 1,000 meters and left to record continuously for months. When scientists reviewed the recordings, they found something unexpected: a strange, complex sound that lasted between 2.5 and 3.5 seconds. It consisted of 5 distinct components, including metallic moaning sounds and a sharp frequency upsweep that rose to nearly 8,000 Hz. The sound was unlike anything in the existing catalogue of known ocean sounds. It was biological in character, meaning it showed the hallmarks of being produced by a living organism rather than by geological or mechanical processes. But no known species could be confidently identified as the source. Researchers initially speculated that the sound might be a previously unknown call from a minke whale, a species known to produce a wide variety of vocalizations. But the frequency range, the structure of the call, and the fact that it was recorded at such extreme depth made this identification uncertain. Minke whales do not typically dive to the depths at which the hydrophones were placed. Other researchers suggested that the sound could be produced by a species that has not yet been identified, an organism living in the deep ocean whose vocalizations have never been recorded. This possibility, while speculative, is not implausible. We have identified only a fraction of the species that live in the deep ocean. The vast majority of deep-sea organisms have never been observed, catalogued, or studied. The idea that an unknown creature could produce a complex, structured call in the deep waters of the Mariana Trench is not science fiction. It is a reasonable hypothesis based on the known limitations of our exploration. The Western Pacific biotwang is not the only unexplained sound recorded in the deep ocean. Over the past several decades, hydrophone arrays deployed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and other research organizations have captured a series of mysterious sounds from various locations in the world's oceans. One of the most famous is the sound known as the bloop. Recorded in 1997 by NOAA's Equatorial Pacific Hydrophone Array, the bloop was an ultra-low frequency sound that was detected by sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart. Its amplitude was enormous, far greater than any known biological sound. For years, the bloop fueled speculation about unknown deep-sea creatures of immense size. NOAA eventually attributed the bloop to the fracturing of large icebergs in the Antarctic, a process known as icequake. But the initial mystery lingered, and the fact remains that the deep ocean produces sounds that we cannot always identify, sounds that challenge our understanding of what lives down there and what the deep sea is capable of producing. And then there are the creatures themselves. The Hadal Zone, the deepest layer of the ocean, is home to organisms that push the boundaries of what we consider possible for life. Amphipods, small crustaceans related to shrimp, have been found living at depths exceeding 10,000 meters in the Mariana Trench. These amphipods are not tiny. Some species found in Hadal trenches reach sizes of more than 30 centimeters, a phenomenon known as deep-sea gigantism. In shallower waters, amphipods typically measure only a few millimeters to a centimeter or two in length, but in the deepest trenches, they grow to sizes that would be considered extraordinary in any environment. The reasons for this gigantism are not fully understood. Some researchers have suggested that the cold temperatures, reduced predation, and high dissolved oxygen levels at hadal depths may allow organisms to grow larger. Others have pointed to the effects of extreme pressure on cellular biology. The full explanation remains elusive. Among the most extraordinary inhabitants of the Mariana Trench are the xenophyrophores, a type of giant single-celled organism found on the deep ocean floor. These creatures, despite being composed of a single cell, can grow to sizes of more than 10 centimeters across. They construct elaborate tests, or shells, from particles of sediment, mineral grains, and the discarded shells of other organisms, cementing them together with organic secretions. The result is a structure that looks, to the untrained eye, like a sponge or a piece of coral, but it is a single cell, one cell, containing a complex network of cytoplasm that extends through the entire structure. Xenophyrophores were discovered in the Mariana Trench at depths exceeding 10,600 meters, making them among the deepest dwelling organisms ever documented. Their size challenges our intuitive understanding of what a single cell can be. We tend to think of cells as microscopic, invisible to the naked eye, the building blocks of larger organisms. But xenophyrophores demonstrate that a single cell, under the right conditions, can build a body that rivals the size of a small organism. The rules of biology, it seems, are more flexible than our textbooks suggest. There is also the matter of the hadal sediment itself, the soft, fine-grained material that covers the floor of the Mariana Trench. This sediment is not inert, it is teeming with microbial life. Studies have shown that the microbial community in hadal sediment is distinct from that found in sediment at shallower depths. The bacteria and archaea that live in the Mariana Trench sediment have adapted to metabolize organic matter at pressures and temperatures that would shut down the enzymatic processes of their surface-dwelling relatives. Some of these microbes consume hydrogen gas released from reactions between seawater and the minerals in the oceanic crust. Others metabolize sulfur compounds, nitrogen compounds, or the organic debris that settles from above. Together, they form a microbial community that processes carbon, nitrogen, and other elements in ways that influence the chemistry of the entire deep ocean water column. The hadal microbiome is not a footnote in the story of the deep ocean. It is a central character, and we are only now beginning to understand its role. In 2017, scientists from the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument and various international research institutions deployed baited camera systems to the floor of the Mariana Trench. The cameras recorded footage of snailfish, also known as Leparidae, swimming and feeding at depths exceeding 8,000 meters. These small, translucent fish have bodies that appear almost gelatinous. Their bones are thin and partially dissolved by the extreme pressure. Their muscles are soft and watery. They look, to the untrained eye, like they should not be able to function as organisms, yet they move with purpose. They hunt, they feed, they reproduce. Their bodies have been remodeled by the environment to such an extent that removing them from the deep and bringing them to the surface causes them to essentially disintegrate. Their cells, adapted to function under enormous pressure, cannot maintain their structure at surface conditions. They are creatures of the deep in the most absolute sense. They cannot exist anywhere else. The biology of the Mariana Trench challenges our understanding of life at the molecular level. Proteins, the molecular machines that carry out virtually every function in a living cell, are sensitive to pressure. At the surface, proteins fold into specific three-dimensional shapes that allow them to perform their functions. High pressure can disrupt this folding, forcing proteins into non-functional configurations. At the pressures found in the hadal zone, most surface-dwelling proteins would be crushed into uselessness. And yet, organisms at the bottom of the Mariana Trench have proteins that function normally, or at least normally enough to sustain life. Studies of enzymes isolated from hadal organisms have revealed subtle differences in their amino acid sequences, small changes that appear to stabilize the protein structure under extreme pressure. These adaptations are not dramatic. They do not involve the addition of new types of molecules or entirely new biochemical pathways. They are small, precise adjustments that allow the existing machinery of life to operate under conditions that would destroy it in any other organism. The precision of these adaptations is striking. They suggest a level of biological specialization that we are only beginning to appreciate. In 2019, American explorer Victor Vescovo piloted the submersible DSV limiting factor to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, reaching a depth of approximately 10,928 meters. This made it the deepest crewed dive ever recorded at that time, surpassing the depth achieved by the Trieste in 1960 by a small but significant margin. Vescovo's dive was part of the Five Deeps expedition, a project aimed at reaching the deepest point in each of the world's 5 oceans. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, Vescovo observed and filmed several organisms, including amphipods and sea cucumbers. But he also observed something else. He found, resting on the sediment at the deepest point on Earth, a plastic bag and candy wrappers. The discovery of human refuse at the bottom of the Mariana Trench was not entirely surprising to scientists who study ocean pollution, but it carried a symbolic weight that was difficult to ignore. Plastic debris has been found at virtually every depth in the ocean, from surface waters to the deepest trenches. Studies have detected microplastics, tiny fragments of degraded plastic less than 5 millimeters in size, in sediment samples collected from the bottom of the Mariana Trench. These particles have been found inside the bodies of amphipods collected from Hadal depths, the organisms that live at the bottom of the deepest trench on Earth, creatures that exist in conditions so extreme that they challenge our understanding of biology, are ingesting human-made pollutants. This is not science fiction. This is documented science, published in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed by multiple independent research groups. Research published by a team from Newcastle University in 2019 analysed amphipods collected from 6 of the world's deepest ocean trenches, including the Mariana Trench. The researchers found that 100% of the specimens examined contained microplastic fibers or fragments in their digestive tracts. 100%, not a fraction, not a sample. Every single organism tested had consumed plastic. The concentrations were highest in the deepest trenches. The Mariana Trench, the deepest of all, showed some of the highest levels of microplastic contamination ever recorded in a marine organism. The researchers noted that ocean trenches may actually act as accumulation zones for pollutants, with the same funnel-shaped geometry that concentrates organic matter, also concentrating synthetic debris. The trenches, in effect, become sinks for human waste. The deepest, most remote, most inaccessible places on the planet are becoming repositories for the byproducts of human civilization. The chemical composition of these pollutants adds another layer of concern. Researchers have found persistent organic pollutants, including polychlorinated biphenyls, known as PCBs, and polybrominated diphenyl ethers, used as flame retardants, in the tissues of organisms collected from the Mariana Trench. These chemicals were banned or restricted decades ago in many countries, but they persist in the environment because they are extremely resistant to degradation. They accumulate in the food chain, becoming more concentrated as they pass from smaller organisms to larger ones. The fact that these legacy pollutants have reached the deepest point on Earth, carried there by the slow downward drift of contaminated particles and the movement of deep water currents, speaks to the global reach of industrial pollution. There is no part of the ocean that has been spared, no depth too great, no location too remote. The chemistry of human industry has penetrated to the absolute limit of the planet's geography. And it gets stranger. Beyond the pollution, beyond the unexplained sounds, beyond the organisms that defy our understanding of biology, there is a deeper mystery at the heart of the Mariana Trench. We have been measuring it for more than a century, and we still cannot agree on its exact depth. Different sonar systems, different survey methods, and different interpretations of acoustic data have produced a range of measurements that vary by dozens of meters. The most commonly cited depth of the Challenger Deep, approximately 10,920 meters, is itself an approximation. Some surveys have recorded shallower readings, others have recorded deeper ones. The precise figure depends on the technology used, the conditions of the water column, the speed of sound at various depths, and a host of other variables that are difficult to control in such an extreme environment. We have measured the distance to the Moon with centimeter-level accuracy using laser reflectors placed on its surface. We have measured the diameter of subatomic particles, but we cannot say, with certainty, exactly how deep the Mariana Trench is. The difficulty of measuring the Challenger Deep accurately reveals a broader truth about our relationship with the deep ocean. Sound, the primary tool we use to sense the shape of the seabed, does not travel through water at a constant speed. Its velocity changes with temperature, salinity, and pressure. As a sonar pulse descends through the water column, it passes through layers of water with different properties, each of which bends and slows or accelerates the pulse in slightly different ways. Correcting for these variations requires detailed knowledge of the water column's properties at the time and place of measurement, knowledge that is often incomplete. Even the best sonar systems produce measurements that are estimates, refined and calibrated but never perfect. The Challenger Deep may be a few meters deeper or a few meters shallower than any published figure, and in a place where precision matters, where every meter of additional depth increases pressure by an additional atmosphere, the uncertainty is not trivial. It is a reminder that the deep ocean resists even our most basic attempts to quantify it. There is also the question of whether the Challenger Deep is truly the deepest point in the Mariana Trench, or whether deeper points exist in unexplored portions of the trench that have not been surveyed with sufficient resolution. The Mariana Trench is more than 2,500 kilometers long. High-resolution multi-beam sonar surveys have covered only a fraction of its total length. There could be, somewhere along the unmapped stretches of the trench, a narrow crevice or a localized depression that descends deeper than the Challenger Deep. We do not know because we have not looked. The deepest point on Earth may not have been discovered yet. It may still be hiding in the darkness, waiting to be found, waiting to push our understanding of extreme depth even further beyond its current limits. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The pollution of the Mariana Trench is only one thread in a much larger tapestry of deep ocean mysteries. To understand the full scope of what the deep ocean conceals, we need to look beyond the trench itself and examine a series of phenomena scattered across the deep sea, each of which challenges our understanding of the planet in its own way. These are not isolated curiosities. They are connected by a common thread. The deep ocean is not the empty, lifeless void that we once believed it to be. It is an active, dynamic, and in many ways alien environment that operates according to principles we have not yet fully grasped. The first of these phenomena involves hydrothermal vents, one of the most significant discoveries in the history of ocean science. In 1977, a team of geologists aboard the research submersible Alvin, operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, was exploring the Galapagos Rift, a volcanic spreading center in the eastern Pacific Ocean, at a depth of approximately 2,500 meters. What they found astonished the scientific community. Hot, mineral-rich water was gushing from fissures in the ocean floor, creating plumes of dark, superheated fluid that billowed into the surrounding water like underwater smoke. These vents, later called black smokers because of the dark mineral particles suspended in their plumes, were releasing water at temperatures exceeding 350 degrees Celsius. Under normal surface conditions, water at that temperature would have been steam, but at the crushing pressures of the deep ocean floor, it remained liquid, a superheated brine laden with dissolved metals and sulfur compounds. But the truly revolutionary discovery was not the vents themselves. It was what was living around them, clustered around the superheated outflows. In an environment of total darkness and crushing pressure were thriving communities of organisms, giant tube worms, some exceeding 2 meters in length, with brilliant red plumes waving in the current, clams the size of dinner plates, dense mats of bacteria coating every surface, crabs and shrimp crawling over the mineral chimneys, an entire ecosystem, vibrant and complex, existing in conditions that were supposed to be incompatible with life. The organisms around hydrothermal vents do not depend on sunlight. They do not rely on photosynthesis. Instead, they derive their energy from a process called chemosynthesis. Bacteria at the base of the vent ecosystem metabolize chemicals, primarily hydrogen sulfide, that are dissolved in the superheated water emerging from the vents. These chemosynthetic bacteria convert inorganic chemicals into organic compounds, forming the foundation of a food web that supports all the larger organisms in the community. The giant tube worms, for example, have no mouth, no stomach, and no digestive tract. They are entirely dependent on symbiotic bacteria living inside their tissues. These bacteria perform chemosynthesis within the worm's body, producing nutrients that sustain the worm in exchange for a steady supply of the chemicals they need. The tube worm is essentially a living vessel for its bacterial partners. Without them, it would starve. Without it, they would lack a protected environment in which to operate. The discovery of hydrothermal vent communities in 1977 fundamentally changed our understanding of what life requires. Before that discovery, it was taken as a given that all life on Earth ultimately depended on the sun. Sunlight drove photosynthesis. Photosynthesis produced organic matter. Organic matter fed everything else. The sun was the source, the foundation, the prerequisite. Hydrothermal vents demolished that assumption. Here was an entire ecosystem that had no connection to the sun whatsoever. Its energy came from the Earth itself, from the heat and chemistry of volcanic activity deep beneath the ocean floor. This meant that life could exist in places where sunlight never reaches. It meant that the conditions we considered essential for life, light, moderate temperature, stable chemistry, were not essential at all. They were merely the conditions we were familiar with. Life, it turned out, was far more adaptable, far more resourceful, and far more willing to exploit extreme environments than anyone had imagined. But here's the problem. Hydrothermal vents are not permanent. They are transient features. A single vent might be active for a few decades before the geological processes that created it shift, or the mineral deposits clog the outflow. When a vent dies, the ecosystem around it dies with it. The tube worms cannot crawl to a new vent. The clams cannot migrate across miles of barren ocean floor. The entire community collapses. And yet, when new vents open up, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, they are rapidly colonized by the same types of organisms. How do these creatures find new vents in the vast darkness of the deep ocean? How do their larvae travel such enormous distances? How do they sense, from kilometers away, the chemical signature of a new vent beginning to form? These questions remain largely unanswered. The deep ocean is too vast, too dark, and too difficult to observe for us to track the movements of organisms that live at these depths. We know they arrive. We do not fully understand how. The implications of hydrothermal vent ecosystems extend far beyond the ocean floor. The discovery that life could exist without sunlight, sustained entirely by chemical energy from the Earth's interior, changed our understanding of where life might exist in the broader universe. If life can thrive in the dark, high-pressure, chemically extreme environment of a deep-sea hydrothermal vent, then it could potentially exist in similar environments on other worlds. The subsurface oceans of icy moons like Europa and Enceladus are believed to contain liquid water in contact with rocky ocean floors, conditions that could produce hydrothermal activity, similar to what we see on Earth. The search for extraterrestrial life, one of the most ambitious scientific endeavors in human history, may ultimately be guided by what we learn from the darkest, deepest corners of our own ocean. The hydrothermal vents of the deep Pacific may be the Rosetta Stone of astrobiology, and we have only begun to read them. There is another dimension to the hydrothermal vent story that deserves attention. The minerals deposited by these vents are rich in metals that are increasingly valuable to modern technology. Copper, zinc, gold, silver, and rare earth elements accumulate in the chimneys and mounds built by hydrothermal vents over decades and centuries. These deposits, known as seafloor massive sulfides, have attracted the attention of mining companies that see in them a potential source of materials needed for batteries, electronics, and renewable energy infrastructure. The prospect of mining hydrothermal vent deposits raises profound ethical and practical questions. These are among the most biologically rich and scientifically important environments in the deep ocean. Destroying them to extract minerals would eliminate ecosystems that we have barely begun to understand. The organisms that live around hydrothermal vents are found nowhere else on Earth. Many of them are new to science. Some of them produce enzymes and compounds that may have medical or industrial applications. Mining these sites would be irreversible. The vent communities would not recover on any timescale meaningful to human civilization. The second phenomenon takes us to one of the most haunting features of the deep ocean floor: brine pools. A brine pool is an underwater lake, not a metaphor, not a loose description, an actual lake, sitting on the floor of the ocean, with a clearly defined shoreline, a surface, and water that is chemically distinct from the ocean around it. Brine pools form when salt deposits on the ocean floor dissolve into the surrounding water, creating a solution that is so much denser than normal seawater that it sinks and pools in depressions on the seabed. The result is a body of fluid that sits within the ocean the way a pond sits within a field. You can see the boundary. You can watch as objects settle onto its surface as though resting on the top of a liquid. Submersibles have filmed this phenomenon in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Red Sea, and the imagery is profoundly unsettling. A lake at the bottom of the ocean, a body of water within a body of water. The visual contradiction is enough to challenge your sense of reality. Brine pools are among the most toxic environments on the planet. The concentration of salt in a brine pool can be 3 to 5 times higher than that of the surrounding seawater. They often contain elevated levels of methane and hydrogen sulfide, gases that are lethal to most marine organisms. The edges of brine pools are littered with the bodies of organisms that ventured too close. Fish, crabs, and other creatures that swim or walk into the brine are quickly overwhelmed by the toxic chemistry and die. Their bodies remain at the edge of the pool, preserved by the extreme salinity, creating a morbid ring of death around the perimeter. Scientists have called these zones toxic shores, and yet, even here, at the edges of these deadly pools, life persists. Mussels and specialized tube worms have been found colonizing the margins of brine pools, surviving in the transitional zone where the brine meets normal seawater. These organisms have developed biochemical adaptations that allow them to tolerate conditions that would kill virtually any other creature on Earth. The numbers are striking when you consider how many of these features remain undiscovered. We have mapped less than 20% of the ocean floor with high-resolution sonar. The brine pools we know about are the ones we've stumbled across during targeted research expeditions. How many more exist in the vast unmapped regions of the deep sea? How many underwater lakes, with their own toxic shorelines and their own specialized ecosystems, sit unseen and unknown on the ocean floor? We cannot answer these questions. We do not have the data. The deep ocean is simply too large and too inaccessible for us to survey with any meaningful completeness. Related to brine pools is another phenomenon known as cold seeps, places on the ocean floor where methane, hydrogen sulfide, and other hydrocarbon-rich fluids slowly leak from beneath the seabed. Unlike the violent, high-temperature outpourings of hydrothermal vents, cold seeps release their fluids at temperatures close to the ambient water. The flow is slow, steady, and persistent. Some cold seeps have been active for thousands of years, creating stable chemical environments that support dense communities of specialized organisms. Tube worms at cold seeps can live for centuries. Clams at cold seeps grow so slowly that a specimen the size of your fist may be more than 100 years old. These are among the longest-lived organisms on the planet, existing at speeds and timescales that are almost incomprehensible to human perception. They grow a fraction of a millimeter per year. They reproduce infrequently. Their entire existence is a testament to patience, to the power of persistence over time. They are older than most nations, older than most languages, and they sit in the darkness of the deep ocean floor, drawing sustenance from the slow trickle of chemicals leaking from beneath the Earth's crust, undisturbed and largely unknown. Cold seeps are also important for another reason. They are sites where methane, a potent greenhouse gas, interacts with the ocean and the atmosphere. Methane that seeps from the ocean floor may be consumed by microbial communities before it reaches the surface, effectively preventing it from entering the atmosphere. But if conditions change, if the water warms, if the microbial communities are disrupted, if the rate of seepage increases, that methane could escape into the atmosphere in quantities that would accelerate warming. The relationship between cold seeps, methane and climate is complex and poorly understood. We do not know how many cold seeps exist. We do not know how much methane they collectively release. We do not know how the microbial communities at these sites will respond to changing ocean conditions. And we do not know whether the deep ocean's capacity to absorb methane will remain stable. These are not academic questions. They are questions with direct implications for the stability of the global climate, and they remain, for now, largely unanswered. The third phenomenon involves one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in modern history, the disappearance of ships and aircraft in the region known as the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle, also called the Devil's Triangle, is a loosely defined area in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean, bounded roughly by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Over the past century, numerous ships and aircraft have been reported lost in this region, under circumstances that have fueled decades of speculation, conspiracy theories, and popular mythology. Stories range from the disappearance of Flight 19, a group of 5 United States Navy torpedo bombers that vanished during a training flight in December 1945, to the loss of the USS Cyclops, a Navy cargo ship that disappeared with all 299 crew members in March 1918. The popular explanations for the Bermuda Triangle range from the fanciful to the absurd. Theories involving underwater energy fields, alien abductions, time warps, and lost civilizations have been circulating for decades. But the scientific explanations are, in their own way, almost as disturbing. One hypothesis focuses on methane hydrates, deposits of methane gas trapped within ice-like crystal structures on the ocean floor. The waters of the western Atlantic contain significant deposits of methane hydrates. Under certain conditions, these deposits can destabilize and release large volumes of methane gas into the water column. Laboratory experiments and computer simulations have demonstrated that a sudden, massive release of methane from the ocean floor could reduce the density of the water above the release point. If the density drops sufficiently, a ship floating on the surface could lose buoyancy and sink rapidly, without warning and without any obvious mechanical failure. The ship would simply drop through the water, as though the ocean had momentarily ceased to support it. The methane hydrate hypothesis has not been definitively proven as the cause of any specific Bermuda Triangle disappearance, and it is important to note that statistical analyses by various researchers, including those conducted by the United States Coast Guard, have found that the rate of losses in the Bermuda Triangle is not significantly higher than in other comparable regions of the ocean, with similar levels of traffic. Many of the disappearances can be attributed to known hazards, including severe weather, human error, equipment failure, and the sheer depth and vastness of the ocean itself. Ships and aircraft that go down in deep water are extraordinarily difficult to find. The ocean floor in parts of the Bermuda Triangle reaches depths of more than 8,000 meters. At those depths, the wreckage of a ship or aircraft would be virtually invisible, buried in sediment and crushed by pressure. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle may be, in the end, less about what is happening in that region and more about the vastness and indifference of the deep ocean itself. It swallows things, and it does not give them back. The fourth phenomenon takes us to the waters off the coast of Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan. In 1986, a local diver named Kihachiro Aratake discovered a large submerged rock formation on the seabed near the island. The structure, which lies at a depth of approximately 5 to 40 meters, consists of flat, terraced surfaces, right-angled edges, columns, and what appear to be carved steps. It extends for approximately 100 meters in length and is approximately 25 meters in height. The structure, now known as the Yonaguni Monument, immediately sparked intense debate. Some researchers, most prominently Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, argued that the formation is man-made, a remnant of an ancient civilization that was submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last glacial period, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, according to geological estimates. Kimura pointed to features such as the regular spacing of the terraces, the presence of what he interpreted as carved channels and markings, and the overall symmetry of the structure as evidence of human construction. Other scientists have disagreed, sometimes strongly. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, visited the site and concluded that the Yonaguni Monument is a natural formation. Schoch argued that the flat surfaces and right angles are the result of natural geological processes, specifically the fracturing of sandstone along planes of weakness. Sandstone, like many sedimentary rocks, tends to break along flat, regular surfaces when subjected to tectonic stress. The terracing that appears so suggestive of human construction could be the result of differential erosion, where softer layers of rock weather away more quickly than harder layers, creating a stepped appearance. Schoch also noted that similar natural formations exist in other parts of the world, including the coastline of the southern coast of Japan itself. The debate over the Yonaguni Monument remains unresolved. No definitive artifacts, tools, pottery, inscriptions, or other unambiguous evidence of human construction have been found at the site. At the same time, certain features of the structure are difficult to explain through natural processes alone. The combination of regular geometry, apparent symmetry, and suggestive details continues to attract researchers, divers, and theorists from around the world. What makes the Yonaguni Monument relevant to the broader discussion of deep ocean mysteries is not whether it is natural or man-made. It is the fact that it exists at all. The seafloor is full of formations, structures, and features that we have barely begun to document, let alone understand. The Yonaguni Monument was discovered by accident by a single diver in relatively shallow water near a populated island. What lies undiscovered in the vast, uncharted depths of the open ocean is a question that we cannot even begin to answer. The Yonaguni Monument is not the only submerged structure that has sparked debate about what the ocean floor may conceal. Off the coast of western Cuba, in 2001, a team of Canadian and Cuban researchers, surveying the seabed using side-scan sonar, detected a series of large, geometric structures on the ocean floor at a depth of approximately 600 to 700 meters. The sonar images appeared to show regular, angular shapes arranged in patterns that some observers compared to the layout of an urban settlement. Paulina Zalitsky, the ocean engineer who led the expedition, described the formations as potentially man-made and called for further investigation. However, the depth at which the structures were found posed a significant problem for any theory of human construction. At 600 meters below the surface, the site is far deeper than any known coastal settlement. For these structures to have been above water, the sea level would have had to be hundreds of meters lower than it is today, a condition that has not existed for hundreds of thousands of years, if ever, according to current geological models. Subsequent expeditions to the site have been limited, and the formations have not been definitively identified as either natural or artificial. The Cuban underwater structures, like the Yonaguni Monument, remain an open question. And open questions are precisely what the ocean does best. The fifth phenomenon concerns the creatures of the deep sea themselves, organisms that seem to defy the laws of physics and biology as we understand them. We have already discussed amphipods, snailfish, and the communities around hydrothermal vents. But these examples only scratch the surface of what the deep ocean contains. Consider the barrel-eye fish, also known as Macropina microstoma. This creature lives at depths of around 600 to 800 meters in the northeastern Pacific Ocean. It has a transparent, fluid-filled dome covering its head. Through this dome you can see its brain. Its eyes, which are large, green and tubular, point upward through the transparent skull, scanning the water above for the silhouettes of prey. The fish can rotate its eyes forward to look ahead when it feeds. A fish with a see-through head. A fish that looks upward through its own skull. This is not science fiction. This is documented biology, filmed and photographed by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. Consider the giant tube worm, Riftia pachyptila, which we touched on earlier when discussing hydrothermal vents. This organism has no mouth, no stomach, no intestines. It has no digestive system whatsoever, and yet it grows at astonishing rates, sometimes adding more than 80 centimeters of length in a single year, making it one of the fastest growing invertebrates known. Its entire nutritional needs are met by the chemosynthetic bacteria living inside a specialized organ called the trophosome. The tube worm provides the bacteria with hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, and the bacteria produce organic molecules that the worm absorbs. This relationship is so complete, so deeply integrated into the biology of the organism, that the tube worm has lost the ability to feed in any other way. If the bacteria were removed, the worm would starve. It has outsourced its entire digestive function to another organism. This level of symbiotic dependence is extraordinary. It represents a form of biological architecture that we are still working to understand. Consider also the vampire squid, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, whose Latin name translates to vampire squid from hell. Despite its terrifying name, this creature is a quiet, gentle inhabitant of the oxygen minimum zone, a layer of water at depths of approximately 600 to 1200 meters, where dissolved oxygen levels drop to extremely low concentrations. The vampire squid is neither a squid nor an octopus, but occupies its own unique taxonomic order. It has the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal on the planet. Its body is covered in light-producing organs called photophores, which it can activate at will, creating a bioluminescent display that serves to confuse predators. When threatened, it can turn itself inside out, wrapping its webbed arms over its body like a cloak, displaying rows of fleshy spines that make it appear larger and more dangerous than it actually is. The vampire squid does not hunt. It feeds on marine snow, the drifting particles of organic debris that rain down from the waters above. It captures these particles using two long, retractable filaments that it extends into the water like fishing lines. A creature named after a mythological monster, living in the deepest accessible waters, feeding on the debris of the dead. The deep ocean has a dark sense of poetry, and there are creatures we have barely glimpsed. In 2006, a Japanese research team led by Tsunemi Kubodera filmed a live giant squid, Architeuthis dux, in its natural habitat for the first time. The footage, captured at a depth of approximately 900 meters in the North Pacific, showed a creature of extraordinary size and apparent intelligence. Giant squid can grow to lengths exceeding 13 meters, with tentacles that stretch out into the darkness like living cables. For centuries, they were the basis of legends about sea monsters and the kraken. And yet, despite their size, despite their cultural significance, despite the thousands of dead specimens that have washed ashore or been pulled from the stomachs of sperm whales, we knew almost nothing about their behavior until that footage was captured. We still know very little. The giant squid remains one of the most elusive large animals on the planet. Its deep water habitat makes observation extraordinarily difficult. How many other large, intelligent, elusive creatures occupy the deep ocean? We do not know. We cannot know, not until we develop the technology and the will to explore those depths comprehensively. And at our current pace of exploration, that day is a long way off. Beyond the individual creatures, there is the question of entire ecosystems that remain undiscovered. In 2005, researchers from the Census of Marine Life, a decade-long international project that ran from 2000 to 2010, estimated that each deep-sea survey area they studied contained between 30 and 50% previously unknown species. The census ultimately documented thousands of new species and catalogued more than 230,000 known ones. But even after 10 years of coordinated effort involving 80 nations and thousands of scientists, the census concluded that the job was far from complete. The deep ocean remained, in the words of the project summary, the least known habitat on the planet. The census was, in many ways, a first draft, a sketch, an attempt to outline the shape of something too large to comprehend. The deep ocean refused to be contained by the project's timeline or budget. It simply had too much to show, and we had too little time to see it. There is also the question of deep ocean sound, a topic that extends well beyond the Western Pacific biotwang discussed earlier. The ocean is not silent. It is, in fact, one of the most acoustically active environments on the planet. Sound travels faster and farther in water than in air. In the deep ocean, a layer of water called the SOFAR channel, which stands for sound fixing and ranging, acts as a natural waveguide. Sounds generated within this channel, which exists at a depth of roughly 1,000 meters in many parts of the ocean, can travel for thousands of kilometers without significant loss of energy. Whale calls, submarine engines, underwater volcanic eruptions, The cracking of ice shelves and the grinding of tectonic plates all contribute to a constant acoustic backdrop that fills the deep ocean with noise. But within this noise, there are sounds that do not match any known source, sounds that have been recorded by hydrophone arrays and then filed away, unidentified, in scientific databases. The bloop is the most famous, but it is not alone. Sounds named the Julia, the train, the slowdown, and the upsweep have all been recorded in the deep ocean and attributed, sometimes tentatively, to geological or glacial processes. But the uncertainty remains. The deep ocean produces sounds that we hear but cannot explain. It speaks in a language we have not learned. The technological challenges of exploring the deep ocean deserve their own discussion because they are not simply difficult. They are fundamentally different from the challenges of exploring any other environment. In space, the primary enemy is the vacuum. Engineers build pressurized vessels to contain atmosphere. The pressure differential is 1 atmosphere, from 1 atmosphere inside to 0 outside. In the deep ocean, the situation is reversed and amplified to an extreme degree. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure differential is approximately 1,100 atmospheres, from 1 atmosphere inside the submersible to 1,100 atmospheres outside. The engineering required to maintain a habitable space under those conditions is extraordinary. Every seal, every joint, every viewport, every electrical penetration must be designed to withstand pressures that would collapse most structures. A single flaw in the design, a single defect in the material, a single miscalculation in the engineering, and the result is catastrophic implosion. The vessel does not leak. It does not crack and slowly fill with water. It collapses instantaneously, the walls imploding inward at speeds that exceed the speed of sound in the surrounding water. There is no warning. There is no gradual failure. There is simply existence, and then there is not. Communication presents another challenge. Radio waves do not travel well through water. At depths beyond a few meters, conventional radio communication becomes impossible. Deep-sea submersibles communicate with the surface using acoustic signals, transmitting sound pulses through the water column that are received by hydrophones on the support vessel above. But acoustic communication is slow, unreliable, and limited in bandwidth. The data rates available for deep-sea communication are orders of magnitude lower than what is available on land or in space. This means that real-time video from the ocean floor is extremely difficult to transmit. Most deep-sea footage is recorded locally and retrieved when the submersible or the remotely operated vehicle returns to the surface. Scientists studying the deep ocean work largely in the dark, both literally and figuratively. They send instruments down, retrieve them later, and then analyze the data on the surface, often weeks or months after the observations were made. The delay between observation and analysis limits the ability of researchers to respond to unexpected findings or to adjust their experimental protocols in real time. In space exploration, mission control can communicate with spacecraft in near real time, adjusting courses and commanding instruments. In deep ocean exploration, the operator on the surface may not even know what the instrument has recorded until it comes back up. Each of these phenomena, the hydrothermal vents, the brine pools, the Bermuda Triangle, the Yonaguni Monument, and the extraordinary creatures of the deep, tells us the same thing. The deep ocean is not a blank space on the map. It is not an empty margin waiting to be filled in. It is a world unto itself, a world that is active, dynamic, inhabited, and profoundly mysterious. And the Mariana Trench, at the deepest point of that world, represents the ultimate frontier. Not the final frontier, because we have barely begun, but the deepest, the most extreme, the most resistant to exploration and understanding. The Mariana Trench is the place where every challenge of deep ocean exploration is amplified to its maximum. The pressure is the greatest. The darkness is the most complete. The distance from the surface is the longest. And the organisms that live there are the most extreme examples of biological adaptation that we have ever encountered. And this is where the answer becomes deeply unsettling. There is a statistic that is often repeated in documentaries about the ocean. It is repeated because it is true, and because its truth carries a weight that does not diminish with familiarity. The statistic is this: We have explored, by most scientific estimates, less than 5% of the world's oceans. Some estimates place the number even lower. Less than 5%. That means that more than 95% of the underwater world on our own planet remains unseen, unsampled, and unmapped. We live on a world that is mostly water, and we have barely looked at the water. Let that sink in. We have sent spacecraft to orbit every planet in our solar system. We have landed rovers on Mars and sent probes beyond the edge of the heliosphere. We have peered at galaxies billions of light years away with telescopes that can detect the faintest traces of ancient light. And yet, less than 5% of the ocean on the planet we actually live on has been explored. The deepest trench, the most remote abyssal plain, the hydrothermal fields that may hold clues to the origin of life, the brine lakes that sit like alien worlds on the seafloor, the creatures that glow in the darkness, that build shells under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, that survive on chemicals and decay, and the faintest trickle of energy from the Earth's interior. We have barely scratched the surface of what lives beneath the waves. Or, more accurately, we have barely scratched the bottom. More humans have travelled to the surface of the moon than have visited the deepest point in the ocean. This fact is worth stating again in a different way. There are 12 people who have walked on the lunar surface, a body that is roughly 384,000 kilometers from the Earth. As of recent counts, fewer than a dozen people have descended to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, a point that is only 11 kilometers below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The Moon is more than 34 million times farther away than the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and yet it has been visited by a comparable number of human beings. The disparity is not a reflection of interest. It is a reflection of difficulty. Reaching the Moon, as extraordinary as it is, involves overcoming the vacuum of space, a challenge that engineers and physicists have spent decades mastering. Reaching the bottom of the Mariana Trench involves overcoming the crushing pressure of 11 kilometers of water, a challenge that has proven, in many ways, even more daunting. Space is empty. The deep ocean is full. Full of water, full of pressure, full of darkness, and full of unknowns. The disparity between our knowledge of the ocean and our knowledge of other domains is striking in another way. We have higher resolution maps of the surface of Mars than we have of the floor of our own ocean. The Mars Orbiter Laser Altimeter, an instrument aboard the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft, mapped the surface of Mars at a resolution of approximately 100 meters per pixel. The best global maps of the Earth's ocean floor, compiled from satellite altimetry and ship-based sonar, have a resolution of approximately 5 kilometers per pixel. 5 kilometers. That means that features smaller than 5 kilometers across are essentially invisible in our best global maps of the seabed. A mountain range the size of the Alps could be sitting on the ocean floor, and our current maps would not show it. A canyon system the size of the Grand Canyon could be carved into the abyssal plain, and we would not know. We are mapping other planets with higher fidelity than we are mapping our own. The reasons for this disparity are partly technical and partly economic. Mapping the ocean floor with high-resolution sonar requires ships. Ships are expensive to build, to crew, to fuel, and to operate. A single research vessel conducting continuous sonar surveys can cover only a limited area of the ocean floor in a given time period. At current rates of surveying, it would take an estimated 100 to 200 years to map the entire ocean floor at a resolution of 100 meters, 100 to 200 years. And that is with continuous effort, without interruption, without budget cuts, without competing priorities. The scale of the task is staggering. The ocean floor covers approximately 361 million square kilometers. It is, quite simply, too large for us to survey with existing technology within any reasonable time frame. New technologies may eventually change this equation. Autonomous underwater vehicles, known as AUVs, are becoming increasingly capable, able to navigate the deep ocean without a human operator, conducting sonar surveys and collecting samples independently. Some researchers envision fleets of autonomous vehicles fanning out across the ocean floor, mapping the seabed continuously, transmitting data to relay stations, and operating for months at a time without returning to the surface. But these technologies are still in their early stages. The challenges of power, communication, navigation, and reliability at extreme depths remain formidable. The deep ocean is a hostile environment for machinery as well as for human beings. Corrosion, pressure, cold, and the absence of any repair infrastructure all conspire against the long-term operation of equipment at depth. The machines we send into the deep ocean must be robust, reliable, and autonomous to a degree that we have not yet fully achieved. The technology is advancing, but the ocean is patient. It does not adjust its challenges to match our capabilities. And yet, despite these limitations, the fragments of the deep ocean that we have managed to explore have consistently surprised us. Every major deep-sea expedition has returned with discoveries that challenged existing knowledge. The HMS Challenger expedition in the 1870s revealed that the deep ocean was not lifeless. The discovery of hydrothermal vents in the 1970s revealed that life could exist without sunlight. The exploration of Hadal trenches in the 2000s revealed that biological organisms could survive at pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. Each time we have looked, we have found something unexpected. Each time we have reached a new depth, we have discovered organisms, processes, or features that we did not predict. The pattern is consistent. The deep ocean defies expectation, and we have seen less than 5% of it. Consider what this means in terms of discovery potential. Scientists estimate that there are between 700,000 and 1 million species living in the ocean, but current catalogues contain only around 230,000. That means roughly two-thirds of marine species remain undiscovered. The majority of these unknown species are believed to inhabit the deep ocean, the vast regions below 1,000 meters where sampling has been sparse and intermittent. In the Hadal trenches alone, researchers have estimated that as much as 70% of the species collected during any given expedition are new to science. 70%. That is not a gap in our knowledge, that is a chasm. Every time a submersible descends into a Hadal trench, it enters a world populated primarily by organisms that have never been named, never been classified, and never been studied. The Mariana Trench itself illustrates this point with painful clarity. Despite being the most famous ocean trench on Earth, the total area of the Mariana Trench floor that has been directly observed by cameras, whether mounted on crude submersibles or remotely operated vehicles, amounts to less than 1% of the trench's total area. Less than 1%. The Mariana Trench stretches for more than 2,500 kilometers. Its floor is scarred with canyons, draped with sediment, and punctuated by features that no human instrument has recorded. The handful of dives that have reached the Challenger Deep have all visited roughly the same small patch of seabed. The rest of the trench, the overwhelming majority of it, has never been seen. We talk about the Mariana Trench as though we know it. We do not. We have seen a tiny fragment of it. We have sampled an even tinier portion, and we have drawn conclusions based on evidence so thin that it barely qualifies as a foundation. There is another dimension to our ignorance that is rarely discussed. The deep ocean is not static. It changes. The organisms that inhabit it migrate, reproduce, and die on cycles that we have not observed. The chemistry of the deep water changes with the seasons, with shifts in surface productivity, and with the large-scale circulation patterns that move water through the ocean basins over decades and centuries. The geology of the deep ocean is driven by tectonic processes that produce earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and shifts in the shape of the seabed. All of this is happening, right now, beneath the surface of the ocean. And virtually none of it is being monitored. We have permanent monitoring stations on the surface of Mars. We have sensors orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, but we have almost no permanent monitoring stations on the floor of our own ocean. The few that exist are concentrated in a handful of locations, near hydrothermal vents, in earthquake-prone subduction zones, and in a few research corridors established by oceanographic institutions. The vast majority of the deep ocean floor has no permanent observation infrastructure whatsoever. It is the largest blind spot in our understanding of the natural world. Let that sink in. Not in the abstract, not as a statistic to be noted and filed away. Consider what it means in concrete terms. 95% of the ocean floor is unknown territory. That means that the vast majority of the largest habitat on Earth, the abyssal plains, the Hydrothermal trenches, the seamounts, the ridges, the fracture zones, the cold seeps, the mud volcanoes, the brine pools, and the countless other features that we have not yet even named, all of it remains unexplored. We do not know what is down there. We do not know what creatures inhabit those depths. We do not know what geological processes are occurring. We do not know what mineral deposits sit uncatalogued on the seabed. We do not know what the chemistry of the water is at those depths. We do not know what sounds propagate through those waters. We do not know what structures, natural or otherwise, may exist on the ocean floor. We simply do not know, and the scope of our ignorance is not a narrow gap. It is an ocean. This ignorance has practical consequences that extend far beyond the realm of academic curiosity. The deep ocean plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. It absorbs enormous quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It drives global ocean circulation patterns that distribute heat from the tropics to the poles. It stores vast amounts of dissolved oxygen. It influences weather patterns, storm intensity, and precipitation distribution. And yet, because we understand so little about the deep ocean's physical and chemical dynamics, our climate models are built on incomplete data. We are attempting to predict the future behavior of the Earth's climate system while ignoring the single largest component of that system. The deep ocean is not a minor variable. It is the majority of the equation. And we are working with estimates and assumptions where we should be working with measurements and observations. The biological implications are equally profound. The deep ocean is the largest repository of biodiversity on the planet, and we have catalogued only a fraction of the species that live there. New species are discovered with every deep-sea expedition, not occasionally, routinely. Scientists who study the deep ocean have said that finding new species is not the exception, it is the rule. Every sample brought up from the Hadal zone, every photograph taken by a remotely operated vehicle at abyssal depths, every net dragged through the mesopelagic waters reveals organisms that have never been documented. Some of these organisms may produce compounds with pharmaceutical applications. Some may possess enzymes with industrial uses. Some may hold clues to fundamental questions about how biological systems function under extreme conditions. And many of them may go extinct before we ever know they existed, as human activities, deep-sea mining, bottom trawling, pollution and climate change increasingly impact environments that we have not yet even studied. In 2019, the International Seabed Authority, an intergovernmental body that regulates mining activities in international waters, had issued exploration contracts covering more than 1.3 million square kilometers of the deep ocean floor. These contracts authorize mining companies to explore the seabed for valuable mineral deposits, including polymetallic nodules, metal-rich crusts, and massive sulfide deposits associated with hydrothermal vents. The minerals contained in these deposits, including manganese, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements, are increasingly in demand for use in batteries, electronics, and renewable energy technologies. The economic value of these deposits is enormous, and the pressure to begin extracting them is growing. But the environmental consequences of deep-sea mining are largely unknown. The organisms that live in and around deep-sea mineral deposits are adapted to stable, undisturbed environments. They grow slowly, they reproduce infrequently. They occupy ecological niches that may not recover from disturbance on any human timescale. Mining operations on the deep ocean floor would generate plumes of sediment that could travel hundreds of kilometers, smothering filter-feeding organisms and disrupting food webs over vast areas. The noise generated by mining equipment could interfere with the acoustic communication systems used by deep-sea organisms. The removal of mineral deposits would destroy the physical habitats that many organisms depend on, and because we have studied so little of the deep ocean floor, we cannot accurately predict the full scope of the damage. This is not science fiction. This is happening. Contracts have been signed. Equipment is being designed and tested. Pilot mining operations have already been conducted in the Pacific. The race to exploit the deep ocean's mineral wealth is underway, and it is proceeding, in many cases, faster than the science needed to understand the consequences. We are on the verge of industrializing an environment that we have barely begun to explore. We are preparing to alter ecosystems that we have not yet catalogued. We are risking the loss of species that we have not yet discovered. The deep ocean, the last great wilderness on this planet, is facing pressures that it has never experienced before, and we are moving forward with a level of understanding that is, by any honest assessment, insufficient. The Mariana Trench sits at the center of this tension. It is the deepest point in the ocean. It is the most extreme environment. It is the place where the limits of life and technology converge, and it is a place that we have barely explored. The organisms that live in the Challenger Deep exist nowhere else on Earth. They have adapted to conditions that no other environment on the planet's surface can replicate. If those organisms are damaged or destroyed by pollution, by mining, by climate change, or by any other human activity, they cannot be replaced. There is no backup population. There is no reserve colony living in a shallower trench or on a distant reef. The organisms of the Challenger Deep are unique. They are irreplaceable, and they are, at this moment, consuming microplastics that have drifted down from the surface world above. There are efforts underway to address this gap in our knowledge, though they are modest compared to the scale of the challenge. The Seabed 2030 project, a collaborative initiative supported by the Nippon Foundation and the General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans, aims to produce a complete map of the world's ocean floor by the year 2030. When the project launched in 2017, approximately 6% of the ocean floor had been mapped with modern multi-beam sonar. By recent estimates, that figure had risen to approximately 26%. The progress is real, the commitment is genuine, but the remaining 74% represents an area larger than the entire landmass of the planet. Mapping it will require hundreds of ships, thousands of survey hours, and sustained international cooperation on a scale that is rare in any domain. Whether the project will achieve its goal remains an open question. The ocean does not yield its secrets easily, and the clock, in many ways, is running. Beneath the surface of this discussion lies a truth that is both simple and profound. The Mariana Trench is not merely a place of scientific interest. It is a test of our priorities, a test of our capacity for sustained attention, a test of our willingness to invest in understanding before we invest in exploitation. The decisions we make about the deep ocean in the coming decades will have consequences that last for centuries. The ecosystems we choose to protect or destroy, the resources we choose to extract or leave in place, the species we choose to study or ignore, these decisions will define our relationship with the largest and least understood environment on our planet. And they will be made, for better or worse, on the basis of what we know, or what we do not know. Right now, what we do not know vastly outweighs what we do. What does it mean to live on a planet that you do not understand? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a practical one, with practical consequences that reach into every dimension of human life. We build cities on coastlines that are shaped by ocean currents we cannot fully model. We eat fish from ecosystems we have not fully mapped. We dump waste into waters whose capacity to absorb it we have not measured. We extract resources from seabeds whose biology we have not catalogued. We make predictions about the future of the Earth's climate using models that treat the deep ocean as a black box, a vast unknown that is acknowledged in footnotes but not accounted for in calculations. We live on an ocean planet, and we have chosen, through decades of neglect and underfunding, to remain ignorant of that ocean. The consequences of that choice are beginning to emerge, and they are not encouraging. The Mariana Trench is a mirror. It reflects our priorities, our limitations, and our assumptions back at us with uncomfortable clarity. We have spent hundreds of billions on technologies that allow us to observe distant galaxies and land machines on other planets. These are magnificent achievements. They represent the best of human curiosity and engineering. But they also represent a choice. For every dollar spent looking outward, a fraction of a cent has been spent looking downward. For every mission to the outer solar system, a handful of expeditions have been sent to the deepest parts of the ocean. The imbalance is not accidental. It is structural. Space captures the imagination. The ocean does not. Space is visible. The ocean is dark. Space promises new worlds. The ocean promises pressure and cold and silence. And so we look up, because looking up is easier, because looking down is terrifying. There is a philosophical dimension to this imbalance that is worth considering. The deep ocean is the closest analogue to an alien world that exists on the surface of the Earth. The conditions at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the crushing pressure, the permanent darkness, the extreme cold, the exotic chemistry, are as foreign to human experience as the conditions on the surface of Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, where a global ocean is believed to exist beneath a shell of ice. Scientists have speculated that the ocean of Europa might contain hydrothermal vents similar to those found on Earth's ocean floor, and that these vents might support life, organisms that derive their energy from chemistry rather than sunlight, just as the organisms around Earth's hydrothermal vents do. If this speculation is correct, then the best analogue for alien life in our solar system may not be found by travelling millions of kilometres through space. It may be found by descending 11 kilometres through water. The deep ocean is not just an environment, it is a laboratory for understanding what life can be. There is a question that lingers beneath all of this, one that is rarely asked directly because it makes people uncomfortable. What have we lost by not exploring the deep ocean sooner? Every year that passes without comprehensive surveys of the deep ocean floor is a year in which species may go extinct before they are discovered. A year in which geological processes operate unobserved. A year in which the chemistry of the deep water changes in ways we cannot measure. A year in which pollutants accumulate in environments we have not even mapped. The opportunity cost of our neglect is impossible to calculate because we do not know what we are missing. We cannot quantify the value of what has never been discovered. We cannot mourn the loss of what has never been named. But the losses are real, they are ongoing, and they are accelerating. The pace of human impact on the deep ocean through pollution, fishing, noise, and the early stages of mining exploration is increasing faster than our understanding of those environments. The deep ocean also holds answers to questions that matter to every human being alive. The ocean's role in carbon storage, for example, is one of the most critical variables in climate science. The deep ocean stores approximately 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere. Changes in the rate at which the deep ocean absorbs or releases carbon can have profound effects on the global climate. But our understanding of these processes is based on sparse measurements and rough models. We do not have a comprehensive picture of how carbon moves through the deep ocean, how it is stored in sediment, how it interacts with deep water organisms, or how these processes might change as the climate shifts. The deep ocean is not a passive reservoir. It is an active participant in the global carbon cycle, and we are making decisions about the future of the Earth's climate with only a rudimentary understanding of how this participant behaves. The deep ocean also holds potential answers to questions in medicine and biotechnology. Organisms that survive in extreme environments often produce unique chemical compounds that have no equivalent in surface-dwelling life. Enzymes from deep-sea bacteria have already been used in industrial applications, including in the development of heat-resistant and pressure-resistant biological catalysts. Compounds extracted from marine organisms have been studied for their potential in treating cancer, infections, and inflammatory diseases. The deep ocean is a largely untapped reservoir of biochemical diversity. Every organism that goes extinct before it is discovered, every ecosystem that is destroyed before it is studied, represents a potential loss not just for science, but for medicine, for industry, and for the material well-being of humanity. We are, in a very real sense, throwing away a library before we have read it. There is also the question of what the deep ocean tells us about the resilience of life itself. The organisms of the Mariana Trench live under conditions that by any reasonable assessment should be lethal. The pressure alone should prevent the functioning of most biological molecules. The temperature should slow metabolic processes to the point of uselessness. The absence of light should eliminate the primary energy source for all ecosystems, and yet life persists. It adapts. It finds a way. The organisms of the Mariana Trench are proof that life is more resilient, more resourceful, and more determined than our models suggest. They demonstrate that the boundaries of biology are wider than we thought, that the conditions required for life are more flexible than we assumed, that the range of environments capable of sustaining biological activity extends far beyond the narrow band of conditions that we consider comfortable or familiar. If life can exist at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, in absolute darkness, in near-freezing temperatures, then the question of where else life might exist, on this planet and on others, becomes far more interesting. And yet, there is a deeper reflection that goes beyond science, beyond policy, beyond the allocation of funding. The Mariana Trench teaches us something about the nature of knowledge itself. We are a species that prizes understanding. We build models. We construct theories. We measure, categorize, and predict. And when our predictions fail, we adjust our models and try again. This process is the foundation of science, and it has given us extraordinary power over our environment. But the Mariana Trench is a reminder that the world is larger than our models. The deep ocean contains phenomena that we did not predict, organisms that we did not expect, and processes that we do not yet understand. It is a reminder that the map is not the territory, that the model is not the reality, that no matter how precise our instruments become, no matter how sophisticated our theories grow, there will always be regions of the natural world that exceed our current comprehension. The Mariana Trench is one such region, and it is here, on our own planet, beneath our own oceans, waiting patiently for us to pay attention. There is something humbling about standing at the edge of a trench that is deeper than any mountain is tall. Something humbling about knowing that the bottom of that trench contains organisms that have solved biological problems we have not yet even formulated. Something humbling about the fact that plastic bags and candy wrappers have reached places that only a handful of human beings have ever seen. The Mariana Trench does not care about our achievements. It does not care about our technology, our ambitions, or our timeline. It exists on a scale that dwarfs human civilization. Its depth was carved by tectonic forces that operate over millions of years. The organisms that inhabit it have adapted to conditions that would destroy anything we have built. The sediment at its bottom contains a record of processes that extend back further than we can measure. The Mariana Trench is a monument to the power and patience of the natural world, and we are, by comparison, visitors. Brief, fragile, and deeply curious. The question that remains, the question that the Mariana Trench poses to anyone willing to listen, is simple. Will we explore it? Will we commit the resources, the technology, and the sustained attention needed to understand the deepest parts of our own planet? Or will we continue to look elsewhere, drawn by the glamour of space and the comfort of familiar terrain, while the largest and deepest habitat on Earth remains in shadow? The answer to that question will say more about us as a species than any discovery we might make at the bottom. It will reveal what we truly value. It will reveal what kind of stewards we intend to be of the world we were given. And it will reveal whether our curiosity, the same curiosity that drove Pickard and Walsh to seal themselves inside a steel sphere and descend into the unknown, is still alive, or whether it has been replaced by something smaller, something less willing to look into the dark. Beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, at this very moment, there is a place where the water is black. Not dark, not dim, black, the kind of black that has never known light, the kind of black that exists below the reach of every photon the sun has ever released. In that blackness, at a depth of nearly 11,000 meters, under a pressure that would crush steel and bone and hope itself, something is alive, something small, something patient, something that has survived in conditions that would obliterate anything built by human hands. It does not know your name. It does not know what the surface looks like. It has no concept of sunlight, of air, of wind, of warmth. It knows only the weight of the water above it, the cold of the deep, and the slow, silent rain of organic particles drifting down from a world it will never see. And it continues. It feeds. It moves. It persists. It does what life has always done, everywhere, under every condition. It endures. The Mariana Trench is not a problem to be solved. It is not a mystery to be unravelled and filed away. It is a reminder, a constant, silent, crushing reminder that the world is not ours to control. We can map it to a degree. We can measure it to a point. We can send machines into its depths and bring back samples and data and photographs. But we will never own it. We will never tame it. We will never make it small enough to fit inside our understanding. It is bigger than us, deeper than us, older than our entire civilization. And it will be here, pressing down with the weight of 11 kilometers of dark water long after we are gone. We are a species that builds. We build cities, technologies, theories, stories, and identities. We build upward, reaching for the sky with towers of glass and steel. We build outward, spreading across the surface of the land and pushing into the margins of the sea. But we have rarely built downward. We have rarely looked at the deepest places on our own planet and asked, with genuine humility, what is there? The Mariana Trench asks that question of us, and it waits, as it has always waited, in silence, in darkness, in pressure beyond measure, for us to find the courage to answer. The ocean does not demand our attention. It does not send signals. It does not make noise, not the kind we can hear from the surface. It does not threaten, not visibly, not immediately. It simply exists, vast and patient and utterly indifferent to whether we choose to explore it or ignore it. The Mariana Trench will be just as deep tomorrow as it is today. The organisms at its bottom will continue to feed and reproduce and die in their silent, lightless world, regardless of whether a single human being ever looks at them again. The tectonic plates will continue to grind against each other, pulling water and rock into the mantle, reshaping the floor of the ocean on timescales that make human history look like a footnote. The deep ocean does not need us, it does not depend on us, it does not wait for us. But we need it. We need it to regulate our climate. We need it to absorb the carbon dioxide we produce. We need it to support the fisheries that feed billions of people. We need it to drive the currents that moderate the weather. We need it to contain the minerals that power our technology. We need it as a source of knowledge, of wonder, and of humility. We need the deep ocean more than we know, and we know the deep ocean less than we need. When Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep in 1960, they stayed for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That is all the time they had before the ascent had to begin. 20 minutes to look through a small porthole at a world that no human had ever seen. 20 minutes to absorb the reality of the deepest place on Earth. 20 minutes to stare into the darkness and try to make sense of what they were seeing. In those 20 minutes, they saw the sediment. They saw the shapes moving within it. They felt the weight of 11 kilometers of water pressing against their tiny sphere. And then they released the iron ballast, and the Trieste began its slow rise back to the surface. The descent had taken nearly 5 hours. The ascent took a little over 3. And when they broke the surface, when sunlight hit the porthole again, when the air inside the cabin was no longer the only air in the universe, they returned to a world that had no idea what lay at the bottom of its own ocean. In many ways, that world has not changed. We have built telescopes that can see the light of galaxies, formed shortly after the first moment of measurable time. We have split atoms and sequenced genomes and placed footprints on the moon. We have constructed satellites that orbit the Earth and measure its surface with millimeter precision. And yet the deepest place on our own planet, a location that is 11 kilometers away in a direction we never think to look, remains almost entirely unknown. The greatest unexplored wilderness is not above us. It is not beyond us. It is beneath us. It has been here all along, separated from us by nothing more than water and silence and a pressure that we lack the courage or the resources to confront on any meaningful scale. Somewhere tonight, a research vessel is floating on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Its sonar is pinging, sending pulses of sound into the water and listening for the echoes that return from the seabed below. Each echo carries information, a fragment of data about the shape and composition of the ocean floor. Each pulse reaches a little further into the unknown. Each return signal fills in a tiny piece of the map. The work is slow. The ocean is vast. The map will never be complete in any of our lifetimes. But the effort continues. The curiosity endures. The questions persist. What lives at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? We know some of the answers. Foraminifera with their mineral shells, amphipods with their translucent bodies, snailfish with their soft bones and gelatinous flesh, bacteria that feed on chemicals and thrive in the absence of everything we once considered necessary for life. These are the organisms we have found. These are the inhabitants we have documented. But the Mariana Trench stretches for more than 2,500 kilometers. Its floor is covered in features and formations that no human eye has ever seen. Its water column is home to organisms that have never been captured, photographed, or named. What else is down there? What waits in the parts of the trench that we have not yet reached? What lives in the crevices we have not yet illuminated, in the sediment we have not yet sampled, in the water column we have not yet filtered? We do not know. That is the honest answer. We do not know what lives in the deepest, most extreme environment on the surface of our planet. We do not know what geological processes are occurring at the bottom of the Mariana Trench right now, at this very moment, as you listen to these words. We do not know what chemical reactions are taking place in the sediment. We do not know what sounds propagate through the water at those depths. We do not know what the organisms down there are doing, what they are eating, how they are reproducing, how they are dying. We do not know, and the depth of our not knowing is as vast as the trench itself. Think about this for a moment. Right now, at this very second, the Pacific Plate is sliding beneath the Mariana Plate at a rate of roughly 3 to 4 centimeters per year. That does not sound like much. It is roughly the speed at which your fingernails grow. But over geological timescales, that slow, relentless motion carves trenches, builds mountains, triggers earthquakes, and reshapes the floor of the ocean. The Mariana Trench is not a static feature. It is a living scar, constantly deepening, shifting, and evolving as the plates continue their slow dance. The organisms that live at its bottom exist in an environment that is always changing, always adjusting, always in motion. They have adapted not only to extreme pressure and darkness, but to an environment of perpetual geological instability. They live on a boundary, they inhabit the edge of destruction, and they persist. There is a word that scientists use to describe organisms that thrive in extreme environments. The word is extremophile. It comes from Latin and Greek roots meaning lover of extremes. The organisms of the Mariana Trench are the ultimate extremophiles. They love the extreme not by choice, but by adaptation. They have been shaped by conditions so far outside the range of normal biology that they constitute a separate category of life. They are not simply organisms that survive in the deep ocean. They are organisms that can survive nowhere else. Remove them from their environment, bring them to the surface, expose them to normal atmospheric pressure, and they die. Their cells, adapted to function under crushing force, cannot maintain their integrity when that force is removed. They are prisoners of their own adaptation, bound to the deepest, darkest, most inhospitable place on the surface of the earth. And within that prison, they have built lives. Complex lives. Lives involving hunting, feeding, reproducing, competing, cooperating, and dying. Lives that unfold in silence and darkness. Without witnesses, without observers, without anyone to marvel at the sheer improbability of their existence. The Mariana Trench is the deepest scar on the face of the earth. It is the lowest point on the surface of a planet that is mostly water and mostly unknown. It is a place of absolute darkness, of crushing pressure, of profound silence, and of stubborn, persistent, inexplicable life. It asks nothing of us. It demands nothing. It simply exists, deep and dark and patient, holding its secrets in the cold embrace of 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. And perhaps that is the most important thing the Mariana Trench teaches us. Not a fact, not a number, not a discovery, but a feeling. The feeling of standing at the edge of something so vast, so deep, so utterly beyond our control, that all we can do is look down into the darkness and wonder. Wonder what lives there, day. Wonder what we have missed. Wonder what the deep ocean knows that we do not. And wonder whether someday we will find the courage and the humility to go and ask. The water is dark. The pressure is infinite. And somewhere, at the bottom of the world, something is alive.